Hi, hello, my name is Laurent Matteo. I'm working with BMC Software as a lead product developer and mainly on BMC Helix platform and chatbot. So this talk is about how this customer managed to display their on-premise ITSM data inside the BMC Helix cloud. So first of all, I'm going to talk a bit about the BMC Helix platform and what it is with a simple example. So what is the BMC Helix platform? So the BMC Helix platform is a cloud platform that allows you to create application codelessly and very quickly. So you can create an application and create some different objects like record definitions if you want to store data. The view definition will allow you to create the UI to display this data or some view components. The processes and the rules will allow you to implement your business processes. So I will show you that in a small example later. And you have some other objects as well that I will not talk about in this example. So as an example, I created a small software which is change management, a very, very simple implementation. And here is what it is supposed to do. Here is what I want it to do. So what I want it to do is when I create a change, so let's create one here. So when I save this change, I want to receive a notification, a visual notification, and I want to wait the change approver to change the status of my change to approved or rejected. And depending on the value of this status, or approved or rejected, I would like to receive a notification with your change has been approved or your change has been rejected. So here I'm going to save my change, and you can see I received a notification, and I can see my change here. And here I can see the status and the description of my change. So, like I explained before, so I have a record definition change that contains the data. So here I can find my data. In the list of views, I've got my change management console with my grid. So the grid is a view component that I can choose in my palette and drag and drop. And this grid display just changes. And here, when I select one change in the grid, I'm going to display this change inside this record editor, which is going to display a change in edit mode, and the ID comes from the selected row from the grid. So this is a view. And like I explained before, I have now a process to implement my business rule. So my business rule is here very simple. So I have a change coming in input here on the left. I'm going to send a message telling that my change is waiting for approval. That's a blue message you saw earlier. And here this user task element is going to wait for my change to have the status not new. So here, as you can see, my status is new right now. So it's going to wait at this step until the status is not new. Then it's going to go to this branch, which is an exclusive gateway. It's going to take this branch if the status is rejected, and it's going to send a message. Or it's going to take this branch in the default case. So the good thing is I can see exactly where my process is. So here is the example I made. So I can see that it's currently active. And so highlighted in gray, I can see that this step has been executed. And in green, this is a current step. So right now, the process is waiting here because the status is new. So now as a change approver, I'm going to change the status to accepted. So once the status is changed, accepted, I can refresh my process. And you can see now that the process is completed because everything is in gray. And you can see that this step has been executed. The wait has been executed, and we went through this branch because the message has been accepted. So this is giving you a very quick example of what you can do without any code in creating an application on the BMC Helix platform. So let's go back to the presentation. So once your application is ready, you can export the application on your development environment and import it on your next environment, for example, QA, tailoring, or production. And if you need to modify your application, for example, you added a couple of new views, record definitions, you can export a package and import it again on your other environment. So you can create an application or library. The difference between the both of them is an application cannot really be displayed directly in a UI at runtime. It's pretty much like a library in C++, like a .dll, like a DLL, where you put some objects inside of it, so views, record definitions, that will be used with other applications. So for example, it could be like a create task view that you can use in Task Manager or any other application. So it depends what you want to do. So now let's talk about integration. What are the different methods you can use to integrate data inside this BMC Helix platform? So during early meetings between customers and Dave Sulzer and Robert Curley, so Dave Sulzer was enablement manager for BMC, and Robert Curley is a product manager for the BMC Helix platform. When we were doing demos, one of the first questions was, of course, how can I get data from my on-premise ITSM and display them inside the BMC Helix platform? So 2 years ago, we didn't have a lot of options. The main options was to, inside our view, to have a custom component, custom JavaScript component. So you remember, it's a small element I can drag and drop from the palette on the left inside the canvas, so you can create your own elements. So there is another talk about how to create these custom elements. I'm not going to talk about them here. So you have I create a custom component. This custom component will call a custom REST API, and this custom REST API would be in charge to contact and to connect to the distant BMC ITSM platform. So you would do something like that. The custom component JavaScript would call the custom REST API. The custom REST API would use REST API to contact ITSM or the Java AR API to get the incident, getting them back, sending them back to the custom JavaScript component, and to display the incident in a UI. So that was 2 years ago. And now we have way more options. So we have totally codeless solution, and we have some solution using custom code. So the first option, codeless, is web APIs. So web APIs is a way to connect to distant REST API directly through the UI. So you don't have any to use any code for that. So first you put your configuration, so what server you want to connect to, so it's your ITSM, what kind of authentication, so you have Remedy single sign-on or you have OAuth 2. Here it's just a very simple Remedy connection with the username and password. Then you use document to declare how the output is, what the output is going to look like. You're going to see later how it's useful. And then you declare your web API object. So here we just want to get one incident. So we are using the REST API, the standard REST API from ITSM with a API RCS v1 entry on HPD incident, HPD help desk. And we are using this web API using the web request activity from the palette in the process. And here is why document is very important, because here you see that in the response we said, oh, the response is going to look like this. So now inside my process, I can have access to my output of my incident because I documented it. If I didn't do that, I would just have the output block here. But here in my data dictionary, I have access to all the members, all the attributes from my output. So to give you a small example how it would look like. So I created a small example here. So like I said, I have a web API. So first I have a document. So here I have a list of entries. So it's going to be an array. And each incident, I'm getting actually just a JSON, which is an entry ID and incident number. Then in my web API, I have one web API to get incidents, so multiple incidents. So on RC's v1 entry HPDL desk, a get method with a limit query parameter, because I don't want to get all the incidents, I just want to get 10 of them. So now that is declared, I can use it in a process. So I drag and dropped the web request here, activity that I used here. So this is my connection to my ITSM server, my web API, collection, and my REST API call from web API. And you can see here that I have my query limit, my query parameter limit I set to 10 because I want only 10 incidents. So here is how you use this web API. So now if I'm going to execute it, here you can see that I have a message with my 10 incidents. I have my log, and you can see that in my log I got my 10 incidents here, my 10 objects coming from REST API. So I have way more than incident number and entry ID, but in my case I was not interested to get, like, for example, custom text. I just wanted 2 information. And with these 2 information, I just did use a loop to build the text you saw when I executed it. So that was the first way to get external data. So here, this BMC Helix platform is in the cloud, and the data, my incidents, are actually hosted on an on-premise system in Germany. So it's a real use case. So the second way to get external data is to use external record. So we saw earlier that you could use a record definition to store data. And this data is going to be saved inside the BMC Helix platform. But now there is another type, which is external record. So if you are familiar with Remedy and AR system, it will look familiar to you because it's pretty much the same concept as a vendor form. So here what I want to do is get data from an external system, for example, incidents. So I say I want to create a new record, type external record. I select my source, which is my German ITSM server. I say I want to access the form HPDL desk. Here I have to tell what is the mapping between the instance ID and my ID. So between my BMC Helix platform field and the form field. I select the field that I'm interested with, so the status, short description and incident number. And here you can see I have a record definition now, which looks pretty much exactly the same like the one I created for change. The only difference is the data is coming from ITSM, a distant ITSM. But the good thing is now I can use this record definition in anything that is using record definition. For example, in the process, or here you can see that I'm using it in a grid. So to give you a small example, This time I will use actually knowledge management. So here I created already. So if we wanted to do it again, we would do external record. We select the source. And here we select the form. So I would do helpdesk. So here I would map instance ID. So what is a field? What is an instance ID? So it's 179 in Remedy and link to 379 for the BMC Helix platform. And here I have access to all the fields I am interested with. So here I did it for the external ITSM knowledge articles. So here you can see I've got some information from the knowledge articles. And I use this in a view. So I created simply a grid, and this grid is linked to my external data. So if I preview my view, you can see that I have access to the knowledge article, which are actually hosted on my distant ITSM server in Germany. So that's the second way to get external data codelessly. So we'll see another example later. So now let's talk about custom code. So the main solution is to use connectors. So what are connectors? The difference between connectors and, for example, a custom REST API, a custom view component, is a connector is actually a piece of code. It's actually a Docker that might actually is installed inside an integration controller, so which is not installed inside the BMC Helix platform. And the cloud application, which is here the BMC Helix platform, is going to connect to the BMC integration service, which is another server, another service. This BMC integration service is going to connect because to the integration controller. Actually, they always talk together. And we'll ask it, can you get me the list of incidents? And the good thing with the integration controller is that it's hosting the connector. This connector and the integration controller are actually sitting inside your network. So let's say that, for example, you want to get data from your Active Directory, from your ITSM, from your Jira system, and everything is inside your network. If we wanted to connect directly from the cloud, from the BMC Helix platform to your Active Directory, ITSM, or Jira, you would have to ask your security team to open ports, the necessary port for all and every application, and that might be difficult. So here we give you a solution where we tell you, okay, here is a virtual machine. So you just need a CentOS machine. We are going to give you a script to install the integration controller. You can code a connector that will be designed to get incidents, get Jira tickets, get Active Directory information. It will register to our integration service on the cloud. And only the integration controller would sit within your network, and you would just have to open a port to allow connection between the integration controller and the integration service. This way, the cloud application will never talk to something inside your network directly. It would talk through the integration service to the integration controller. So I will show you a bit later how it's actually working. So like I explained, the connectors are actually coming with two flavors. So when you create a new connector, you can create a connector in Java or in Node.js. So when you create the connector using our connector designer, you can create a connector and you can create actions. And these actions, once you create this action, you can generate some code and you can modify some code to do something. So I will show you an example. So here I'm going to connect to my connector designer. And my connector designer is actually sitting on the same network as my ITSM, so in Germany. So you can see here that my integration controller is actually talking to the integration server, and I have one connector created. So let's say I want to create a new one, so I can select if it's JavaScript, Node.js, or Java. I give it a name, and I can give it an action. So for example, this action could be get incidents. And actually I don't need any input parameters. And in output I want a list of incidents. Type string. Then in the build tab, I can generate the source code. So it will create on my integration controller, it will create a folder with the source code, the default source code. Then register will register my new connector with the integration server. And the last step will be to launch the Docker instance, because one connector is one Docker instance. So here, for example, in my catalog, so this is Integration Studio, the integration server. You can see that I have my immersion days incident. This is the connector I created. So this connector is having one action, which is get incidents, and that will return incidents. So now, like I explained, when you click on the generate button, it will generate a Maven project. And inside this Maven project, you have inside Java folder, you have a class, a default class that is generated by the connector controller, by the controller. And at the end of this class, you can find the action getting incidents. So it matches this action. So here there was nothing in the beginning, of course, because it's just a skeleton. So what I did is I used some library, which are the AR Java APIs that you can use in your connector. And I use that to leverage the AR Java API to connect to my German server. So I define my server host, username and password, the server port. I set the connection. I connect it to the form HPDL desk with a very easy qualification, 1 is 1. I get a list of fields, which is a description, and so it's a display ID, instance ID, incident number, and this is description. And I'm going to get a list of incidents. Once I get my list of incidents, I'm looping because I'm creating some incident object, and this incident object is just free information, incident number, summary, and GUID. And the result is actually just a list of incident. So I'm building a list of incident. And when I get this list of incident, I'm going to send back in my incidents. I'm going to send back a string from my incident result. So I'm taking this class, which will contain the number of incidents and my incident list. I'm going to stringify it to send it as a string because, as you remember, my incident is actually a string because right now Integration Studio cannot return a list of objects. So what the workaround we have is we create a list in a class and we just use object mapper to stringify it. So once you do that, you can use it inside your process. So here is a small example. So I have my process. I have a connector activity, connector element. So inside this connector, I'm choosing the connector I created. And I'm using my action, which is get incidents. So let's see what happens at runtime. So here you can see, if I take the last one, you can see that I got some incident coming back. So here I got actually a lot of incidents. And in my incident, I got my incident count, which is 34. And I got an incident list with incident number, summary, and GUID. Because my incident result is my incident count with a list of object incident. And an incident just has the incident number, summary, and GUID. So here is how you create a connector in a nutshell. So the next interesting step that this customer did is they didn't want only to display the data from ITSM for on-premise inside BMC Helix platform. They also wanted to display this view inside DWP and Smart IT. So, because there is a feature that is very interesting with the BMC Helix digital workplace, it's possible to insert a BMC Helix platform view directly in the digital workplace, as a menu item. So here in this screenshot, you can see that I have a BWF menu item, and I'm actually displaying a view from business workflow directly in digital workplace. So in the case where digital workplace is on premise and the Helix platform is on the cloud, so you have a different remedy single sign-on or a different single sign-on solution. So in this case, you can use a pre-authentication functionality, and I will talk about a little later. So here is the documentation to use how to embed this view inside an iframe, for example, because you can also embed an external view from BLX platform inside your portal, for example, if it's in PHP using an iframe. So here is a link to the documentation. And here is a pre-authentication I was talking about earlier. So how to do when you try to connect two systems that have different single sign-on. So here is an example. So here on the left, I have the digital workplace, DWP, which is on-premise, so protected by a remedy single sign-on server. On the right, I've got business workflow hosted by the BMC Helix platform and protected by another remedy single sign-on server. So if I were to use this view directly inside DWP, the user would have to log in another time, an additional time, once to connect to digital workplace. And when we try to display the view from business workflow, the user would have to log in again because the second single sign-on would not know that the first one, the user is actually logged in on the first one. So the idea behind pre-authentication is to say, well, if I'm logged in already on the first application, I would like to have a way to tell the second single sign-on server that the user is already logged in, so he doesn't need to log in again. So like a friendship or secret handshake system. So how is it working? First, you generate a certificate and you get a private and public key. The private key is going to be saved digital workplace, and the public key is going to be stored on the distant remedy single sign-on server on the cloud. Then on digital workplace, you're going to tell what is the domain of the distant cloud remedy single sign-on server, and you're going to create a menu. This menu is going to be to have a title, and the URL from the business workflow view. Then at runtime, Digital Workplace is going to generate a JOT token, and this JOT token is going to be signed using the private key. Then automatically, Digital Workplace is going to use this JOT token to build an URL with the Cloud Remedy single sign-on server, telling to load the business workflow view and using this JOT token. So the query is going to go to the BMC Helix platform. The Remedy single sign-on agent will see that it's a cross-launch. And the Remedy single sign-on server is going to check that the JOT token is actually correct. So it's going to use a public key to check that, to verify that the query actually comes from a friend, really from the BMC DWP server. If everything is okay, so it's also going to check that the user is actually exists on the cloud, because it's going to check that. And if everything is correct, the view is going to be served without the user to log an additional time. So let's see a first example. So there was one time when I was professional services for BMC, and during a proof of concept, I was given a challenge. And this challenge was to display inside my IT at the time, so Digital Workplace now, the top 10 knowledge incidents inside the console, the my IT console. So it was not possible at the time out of the box. So what I had to do is modify the minify code from my IT, do a call using JavaScript code to a proxy. This proxy would contact the ITSM server using Java API to get the knowledge articles and back to the UI. So it was very hacky, and it was working, but I mean, it was very hard to maintain because everything, I had to modify minified code, and it was not really the right way to do. So here is pretty much how it was looking at the time. So here I got my IT, and I modified the code from my IT to use ng include, so which is a small JavaScript code, to call a GSP page. The GSP page would call another GSP page hosted on the mid-tier that would connect to Remedy using our API to get the knowledge articles, and back to the UI to be displayed. So I couldn't call directly from the UI from the MyIT to Remedy because they were not on the same domain, and that doesn't work. There is no cross-domain at the time available. So here is how it was working. So I had an ng include, which was calling my proxy. This proxy was calling a page on the mid-tier, and this page on the mid-tier was getting knowledge articles, and then it was coming back again. So how could we do that now? Well, we saw actually that it was working because in the example I presented to you earlier, I show you how to get the knowledge articles coming from my German server, so using external records. So we have actually a view that contains knowledge articles. If you remember, here I got my view, and this view contains the knowledge articles. So we got our first part correct. So here there is even a sort. So I got my top 10, let's say. So now what I want to do is display this view inside Digital Workplace. So for that, I'm going to connect to the Digital Workplace admin page. I'm going on configuration. I have a BMC Helix platform link. So here you can see what I was referring to during the demo, where you give the Remedy single sign-on server and you upload the private key, the certificate. Here in this case, I don't have to do it because everything is sitting on the same cloud. so DWP and the BMC Helix platform, so I don't have to do it. But if you had to do it like pre-authentication, that's where you would put the information from my diagram. So here I need to give the URL from my view. So I need to get it. So here I created a small menu displaying my view. So here is the view. So a little trick, if I use this URL, it will actually display inside Digital Workplace this shell, this menu, and we don't really want that. We just want actually the content of the view. So there is a little trick which is documented. Is using iView instead of view, and the shell will disappear. So that's the data I want to be displayed. And here I want knowledge management. So here my menu is created. So let's check inside Digital Workplace now. So you can see I have an item, RKM, and when I click on it, it should load my view. And as you can see, here is my view which is actually hosted here and displayed on Digital Workplace. So one thing that I really like is we have a lot of customers asking, oh, is it possible to customize, for example, a view from Digital Workplace? And it's very hard to do so when it's not possible. The good thing is, if you think about it, you can very easily customize this view, for example. And when you customize this view, you don't have to deploy anything on Digital Workplace. So let's say here that I want to change my title. And let's say that I want to display my grid on the left. So here I just need to save my view to change it and to refresh on Digital Workplace. And you can see that the layout has changed to match what was on the BMC Helix platform view. So let's say that you want to create a console, or you want to create, for example, you have an application that you want to display in BMC Helix platform, from BMC Helix platform inside the Digital Workplace, and you want to customize it. You can actually customize it very quickly in the platform and just have to refresh the page in Digital Workplace without having to deploy or change anything in Digital Workplace. So I find that interaction very useful and very interesting, very powerful. So that was a small example to show you what you could do as integration end-to-end. So the knowledge articles are hosted on the on-premise German server. I used external records to get them inside my BMC Helix platform. I created a view, and I use this view to be displayed in Digital Workplace on the cloud. So the great thing is everything is supported and upgrade proof. So it's not possible to do that in Smart IT yet. It is possible just to do cross-launch in Smart IT, which means that you can create a menu item and it will just open a new tab with the BMC Helix platform view. So let's talk to the customer use case now. So I was abroad with Robert Curley and with this customer, and we were talking to their team. And one time, one of the users of this customer came and said, well, we have this other use case where we display incidents inside Digital Workplace. So incidents are coming from our ITSM on-premise. So the way it's working is we get the user by the connected username, and we get his AD groups inside our Active Directory. Then we connect to our CMDB to get the corresponding groups and we get relations. And with this relation, we compile a list of support companies and support groups. And when the user selects one support company or support group, then we go to ITSM to fetch the incidents. So it was really like an intermission between two talks with this customer. So I had quite some hard time understanding, really grasping what you were talking about, but it looked very, very complex. So this was my first reaction, followed very quickly by this one, where I just wished I never heard of it, because it sounds very, very complex. But actually, we had another talk about it, and it was making sense. So I will explain to you with a diagram, and it will be easier to understand what was happening. So it turns out that a partner created an application hosted on Tomcat, and this application was displayed inside Digital Workplace, where the customer modified the minified code, so pretty much like I did with knowledge management, if you remember my first use case. So the problem with that is the customization has to be reapplied each time you do the upgrade. So it's not really supported, and it could lead to some problems, and it had some limitations. So here is what was happening. So here I am on Digital Workplace, and they modified the source code of Digital Workplace to display a menu item and to display this view hosted on a Tomcat server. So the first thing that this application is doing is getting a list, connecting to the Active Directory to get the list of groups for this user. Then it connects to the CMDB to get a mapping from this group to CIs and to get relations. Then it comes back to the UI, where it filled the list of support companies and support groups. Then once the user selects a support group, he would actually go to ITSM, get the incident for these support groups, and display them inside the grid, inside the table. So that's the way they do it. So now we had a little challenge. The challenge was to not to use the partner code, but actually to try to do this use case using the BMC Helix platform. And the source code of the partner was in Java and AngularJS for JavaScript. So the goal was to use as much as that code as possible. So basically to use BMC Helix platform to show that we could do the same thing very easily, converting the application if possible. So what we did is we decided to create two connectors, one for LDAP and one to access the CMDB and ITSM. The reason we decided to do two connectors is dual. The first one, it's not really the same source. One is LDAP, which is not BMC product, and another one is actually ITSM. So that's why we decided to use two connectors. Then we use Java connectors instead of Node.js because we had some Java code coming from the partner. So we wanted to leverage that. Also, the other reason is why we did not use processes and REST APIs. The reason is there is a lot of business logic inside the partner code to build, for example, the list of objects, the list of CIs. And we didn't really want to do that in a process. It would have been very, very big and complex process. And we had already the source code from the partner. So we created a very simple process that is in charge to get the user LDAP groups and the related CI. So the reason we decided to do that in a separate process is because we might want to cache the information. Let's say that the foundation data are synced, for example, once a week or once a day. Maybe in production, we wouldn't want to get the LDAP information and SMDB information at each refresh of the page for one user. But maybe to do that once a day or once every 10 hours, for example, so we could optimize it. The second process would be to get the incident for one specific company or one specific group. So here we can find back our branch, so our exclusive gateway. So if in entry we got a support group, we will call this connector action. And if it's a company, we'll call another connector action. For the UI, I decided to use a custom view component. And the layout is a bit different than the one from the partner to make it a bit more, not really modern, but more fitting what we do in the BMC Helix platform and the digital workplace. Because the idea is that when you integrate something inside digital workplace on BMC Helix platform, the goal is to be as close as possible as what we provide out of the box. So this way it doesn't feel out of place, and the user wouldn't see the difference between a BMC object and a custom object coming from you. So here is now like the whole process, how it is working. So we have digital workplace, which is on premise, and we have our BMC Helix platform on the cloud. So to display the view, we would have to use pre-authentication that I talked to you about before. In the middle, we have our integration service that is always connected to our integration controller. So let's see how everything is working now. So first, inside digital workplace, it wants to get this view from hosted on the Helix platform. So it's using pre-authentication to get the view. The view is then displayed inside digital workplace, and the first thing it does is we need to get the Active Directory groups for this user. So our first process kicks in to get the LDAP groups. So it's going to connect to the integration service. Integration service is going to connect to integration controller to get the AD groups action. So the AD groups come back to the first activity, are passed as input in the next activity. At this time, we'll execute another action that will get the CMDB CIs and relations. That will come back to the UI. So with both those information, we are going to fill our dropdown for the list of companies and list of support groups. And when we select a support group, it will trigger our second process. So here we get the ITSM tickets for one support group. So it is a connector action. It's going to go to integration service, to integration controller, and get incidents back to the UI. And it will display the incident inside the UI. So it looks very complex this way because you have multiple parts. So you have the cloud remedy single sign-on server, the integration service, the integration controller. But for the end user, the only thing they will see is this page with the list of companies and support group and the relevant incidents. This relation between digital workplace and the Helix platform is done only once, as you saw earlier. So it's one-time only configuration. Then for the connector, once you create your connector and you register it, you don't have to do anything else anymore. So it's also one-time configuration. So it looks complex, but it's actually configuration and one shot. After that, you can just use the connectors, and for the end user, it will be much easier for them because they have access to ITSM data directly inside digital workplace. So to give you an idea how it went, what is the effort? So we created 2 connectors, and it took about 1.5 days by connector. And just to be honest, it was my first connector, and it was the first connector for the customer. So if we did it again, it might be a bit faster. We managed to reuse pretty much 95% of the Java partner code. So we had to change a couple of classes name or the way we get information and when we save information, because as you remembered, we used to use an object mapper to stringify our classes or objects to send them as string. But we reuse pretty much all the code from the partner, so that's why also it was so fast. Now on the UI part, to create the view component to display the data, so the grid and the drop-downs, it took about 2 or 3 days, but it was not full time. But then again, I'm pretty used to it, so it is not very overly complex, to be honest. So I would say maybe 2 or 3 days of work. And because I wanted to do something that is still professional UX, so a very nice view. The processes themselves were very quickly done, about 10 minutes, because we had a small example, remember, where we get incidents using connectors, so it's just drag and drop of element and selecting the right action. And we used only 25% of the UI code from the partner. So the reason why we used only this low percentage of code is not because we had to recode the rest, but because the platform is actually providing you with a SDK, so with method that will allow you to use, for example, quick methods to call REST APIs. Moreover, you don't have to, for example, think about authentication because the platform is doing that for you. You don't really have to think about the main layout because the view designer is going to take that in account for you. Error trapping. So overall, we just provide to you an SDK with methods that will accelerate your code. So pretty much the code that was reused is the grid that was custom code that customer used, and they wanted to have pretty much the same display for the grid. So that's the amount we reused. So I recoded maybe 20 lines of code overall that was not coming from the partner. So the step that actually took the most time is the pre-authentication between Digital Workplace and BMC Helix platform. It took pretty much 1 week, and it was between us and the BMC support. But now everything is documented and should be much faster. So there is one step that is not possible from directly from you, from the user. So let's go back to the pre-authentication. So during the pre-authentication configuration, I mentioned that you need to generate a certificate and you have a private key and public key. So BMC support can provide to you a script that will help you generate this certificate and keys, but you cannot set the public key inside the Cloud Remedy single sign-on server because it's our server. So you would have to open a ticket with BMC support and tell them, well, here is the public key. And this public key is going to match Digital Workplace server. And here is a domain name from Digital Workplace server. So you would have to work with BMC customer support for that, for this configuration. But like I said, it's one shot. So like I explained before, it does seem complex, but it's pretty much straightforward once it's set up. The complexity is hidden to both the end user and the business analyst who create the views and the process using the connectors. It is also possible to reuse existing Java code and use that inside connectors. In this case, we were very lucky and we were able to reuse a very large amount of code and not really spend time on modifying the code or creating the code from scratch. Same thing for UI if your UI is in AngularJS. So once again, what I really like with the interaction between the BMC Helix platform and Digital Workplace is the way you can display inside Digital Workplace a view from the BMC Helix platform. So this way you can change the layout without having to trigger a cache change. So for example, empty your web browser cache, and you don't have to change anything inside Digital Workplace. Everything is done on the BMC Helix platform side. So the other good thing is you can use data coming from different sources and federating them inside BMC Helix platform view. So we saw an example with the AD groups and the incidents and the CMDB. So it's actually a very good example. Another very interesting point is the UI is seamless and does not seem out of place. It looks pretty much like a Digital Workplace object. And the user doesn't have to log in twice because of pre-authentication. So if you want more information, here is some links on the documentation from BMC. And it is also possible to request a development environment where you can actually create your own connectors and do your test. And I also provide a sample library, which is a bundle with some code example. And I have also a YouTube channel where I explain the different example. So I plan to create some demos of connectors and some videos. And so I will update those links. So just take this link or this QR code. It will open a text file on the Dropbox that will contain all those links. And it will contain the YouTube channel that I will create for connectors and another GitHub repo specifically for connectors. Thank you.